All right, our point number one, of course, always start with great objectives. Now, a question that always comes up is how many objectives is too many? I usually like to articulate it as if you have 2 or 3 objectives, that's usually great. And we're going to look at some examples in just a minute. But if you have somebody who comes to you with a long list of objectives, not a list of questions, but a long list of objectives, that's one of those places where sometimes you may have to be a little bit consultative to either help them to consolidate or prioritize. But that's where we need the clarity. We have to have absolute clarity about what the research is intended to accomplish. For example, if I am doing, can somebody give me a different brand other than Microsoft? I need a non-tech brand for this one. What would be a fun brand other than Microsoft to do work for? Oh, J. Crew. Let's go into fashion and retail. Awesome. Thank you, Alita. So let's imagine that I am doing a project for J. Crew. Let's imagine that this is a project related to, let's say they want to maybe test some new in-store, oh, actually, no, we want to test interest in a co-branding, right? So maybe J. Crew is thinking about doing some co-branding with Land Rover. This is totally fictional. If anybody here works for either J. Crew or Land Rover, I promise you this is totally made up. Oh, you like home goods better? Oh. All right, I'm going to go with my co-branding. So let's imagine we're doing a survey to understand, thank you, we're going to go with a survey for J. Crew to understand the potential response perceptions if they were to co-brand with Land Rover. So what's their objective? Is their objective to decide whether the combination is attractive? Is the objective to understand if that combination of brands would be more attractive than, say, if they were to partner with Cadillac or Mercedes-Benz? Is the objective to understand with what customer segments a co-brand with Land Rover would be most successful? So there are a lot of potential but different related objectives. I really want to make sure that we've got just 2 or 3 documented, agreed upon before we start the process. Only once I know what that objective is, can I specify who I want taking my survey. So in my J. Crew example, if the idea is really truly that I just want to understand with my, say, my current target market, my current J. Crew target market, I want to know whether or not they would find a co-brand with Land Rover to be attractive or interesting or otherwise appealing. Okay, well, now I learned something about my population. I learned that I probably want people who are current J. Crew customers. So that's going to help me specify my target market. Maybe I want people who have purchased a product in a J. Crew product in the last 2 years, or who have purchased from our e-commerce site in the last 6 months, right? So there could be different ways that I get to my J. Crew customers. Then I may also want people who own cars. Maybe, maybe not, but I'm doing a hypothetical example, so let's go with the maybe. So maybe I want people who own cars or people who own luxury cars. So I have to start, once I know what that objective is, I can have a more meaningful conversation. All right, so if our goal is to understand whether or not the combination of J. Crew and Land Rover is going to appeal to our current customers, I probably want to focus on people who either own cars or at least sometimes drive cars. Do I want people who currently own a Land Rover? What do you think? In this case, would I want people who already own a Land Rover? Perhaps, but that might be over screening. So thank you, Alita. Thank you, Artem. So in this case, if I'm trying to understand whether or not they perceive that as attractive, what I probably want to do is find out what brands of cars they own so that I can do that analysis. So I have that option, right? I might want to be able to say, well, I found out if they own cars, or we decided as the team that for this effort, we wanted to focus on, people in our customer base who also either own or aspire to own luxury cars. But in this case, what I might be saying is basically, have a question where I can say, if they have a car, what brand they have, so I can look at whether or not the favorability towards that particular co-branding varies by whether or not they already own a Land Rover, right? So once I get those objectives though in mind and I'm super clear, then I can start having the conversation about, okay, how narrow do we want to be for this particular project, right? I don't want to overscreen because that can really end up being, having a negative impact on the usability of the research, but I probably want to have some sort of screening. So I need to know my objectives so I can know who my target population is. And in most projects, a lot of folks, obviously a lot of you are doing consumer research. I believe some people here are doing B2B research also. So we're going to specify and start talking with our team about who we're specifically looking for, what are their demographics, what other screeners we're looking for. And again, if I ever use language you're not comfortable with, please don't be shy. I think Alita's got a good point. You might want them to at least be aware of certain luxury brands. So I might have a question that says, which of the following brands have you heard of? Or for the following brands, or maybe an unaided question, although that would be hard to bring in then. So let me retract the unaided comment. But it might be a good idea to say, which of these brands have you heard of, or which of these brands have you ever shopped for, or ever owned. There could be a few different ways you want to get at some level of qualification there. Once I know what my objectives are and my target population is that is required to meet those objectives, now I need to get buy-in from my team. I have a point of view on this that not everybody agrees with, but let me just throw it out there and you guys can tell me if you agree or if you disagree. My feeling is that as a person who does survey research, so I'm a market research and insights professional, I do survey research. I feel like whoever I'm doing the survey research for is my client. And for some people, my client is an external client. Maybe if I work at a full service research agency, I'm primarily serving outside clients. So I work at agency XYZ and my client is J.Crew. In other cases, my client might be internal. So some of you work on insights teams inside of brands. So you might be working at J.Crew doing the project for J.Crew. I consider that client in any case, whether it's an external or an internal client. I don't know. Anybody disagree with me? Any differences of opinion on this? I love differences of opinion. Alita agrees, right? So we want this. We want to treat them like clients and give them that customer experience, even if they are internal clients and more like colleagues or peers, but still they're coming to me because I'm the survey research expert. I want to treat them like a client. And that does mean getting buy-in. And this can be a little bit challenging, especially for those high visibility projects. Has anybody here ever worked on a, let's say, a big market segmentation study? Or if not a big market segmentation study, how about a big customer satisfaction study? Those are the types of projects that tend to have a lot of visibility, and they can be a little controversial because the results can sometimes require people to hear either unexpected or bad news, or may require business process change in order to take advantage of. Oh, thank you, Alita. So Alita's done both market segmentation and big customer sat projects. And Alita, please tell me if you disagree with me at all, but in my experience, and I've talked with other instructors here at Research Rockstar about this a lot, when you're dealing with those really high visibility projects, especially, getting everybody to approve the written goals can be really difficult, but you need to do it to save heartache later. So here's the nightmare scenario that we want you to avoid. You start a project, everybody's on board, you've documented your objectives and your target population. You had a meeting, you had a phone call, everybody says, yeah, we're good to go. You go out and you do the research and you come back 6 weeks later and you present your findings and some executive raises their hand and says, I didn't think that was the goal of the project. I thought we were trying to do this other thing. Yikes. What a way to suck all the energy out of your presentation, not to mention your entire project. So we have to be really cautious about getting things in writing, especially for high visibility projects. For those of you who are working on those high visibility projects, there may be different executives who are participating, who are going to be using the research at the end, and these folks tend to be busy. So unfortunately, we need to manage them a little bit to make sure they really are understanding the objectives and the target population, because that's going to drive the rest of our process. And if they haven't really had buy-in then, if they haven't really agreed to documented objectives and population, you're at risk of having that nightmare at the end of your project, or of experiencing the survey researchers' other terrible nightmare, never-ending questionnaire design. Has anybody here ever had a questionnaire design process where you went through more than 10 iterations before you got to an approved questionnaire? Chad's right on it. Thank you, Chad, for your candor. You're fantastic. All right, let's see. What's the worst anybody's ever had? I think I might have broken 20 a couple of times. I had this one client years ago. I'm not going to name names. I had this one client years ago, and it was one of those cases where they had a very large team, and they insisted that everybody on their team read the questionnaire drafts. And it was a nightmare because I would submit a draft, get some feedback, make some changes, submit another draft, and then client A would contradict the change that client B had given me before, basically undoing a change. So I was putting things in, taking them out, putting them back in. It was a nightmare, right? But it sounds like you guys can all relate to me. So, but especially for those of you folks who are newer, I know it might sound like I'm asking you to be really nitpicky with your clients, but you have to document your objectives and your population. They have to get it in writing. They have to approve it. Otherwise, you are going to risk those nightmare scenarios of either the never-ending questionnaire design process or the end of project angry client. I don't want you to ever have either of those experiences.